So, if I do, I was trying to do a branch. Check. Let's go and fix that. Okay. Cool.
It's 32-bit, right?
Yeah, 32.
Okay. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's panel, How We Became Plastic People and How to Change It. I'm Dianna Cohen. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Plastic Pollution Coalition. We are a communications and advocacy organization working towards a more just, equitable, regenerative world free of plastic pollution and its toxic impacts. Thank you.
In favor.
Thank you. A little bit of background about myself, and I want to take us through things quickly as well so that we can get to our discussion and then to the Q&A. I began as a visual artist working with plastic as my primary material, and that brought me to co-founding Plastic Pollution Coalition in 2009. You know, we're a global nonprofit, and what we've seen just in the time that we've been working on the issue is a much broader realization and public awareness of the issue and the impact of the issue. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, but today, before I introduce our esteemed panel, we are really here to discuss the new documentary film, Plastic People. And I just would like to get a show of hands. How many people in this room have seen the film?
It's only screened once or twice, so but that's okay.
Okay, so the film will be screening 3 more times, twice tomorrow and then again on the 14th. And we do have some cards that we can pass to you. It's also in the app for South by Southwest, so we'd love it if you have a chance to see the film. But just to set the stage for this, we're going to show you the trailer for the film to get started.
Microplastics are possibly the most serious type of pollutant that our society has ever created.
I tested snow in our backyard and found tiny fragments of plastic particles. When I came home, I told my children to not catch snowflakes. It's everywhere. You go out into the world and you're going to be exposed to it.
Plasticizers have been implicated in various health problems: heart disease, diabetes, obesity, cancer, fertility problems.
We're finding microplastics wherever we look in the human body.
We know that humanity is getting sicker. I don't know if there's a direct connection or not, but it's something I want to find out.
This is the bit that I do for science, literally.
I think everybody has microplastics in their body.
Yes.
Oh, everybody.
So like this fiber that we saw here, polyester.
I asked the doctor, I said, how come I can't remember my child growing up? Apparently, she said, that's when you got hit with high doses of benzene.
Plastic is like the embodiment of capitalism. It made possible the material world that we live in now. They are the bones, the skin, the connective tissue.
Virtually every molecule of plastic ever created still exists somewhere on Earth. The plastic never disappears, it just breaks down into tinier and tinier particles.
Is this soil or plastic? Plastic soil. We are producing poisonous food. We are poisoning ourselves with our hand.
Was that plastic? I'm still processing the fact that this stuff is really in my body.
This is the story of a new world. A world that begins in the mysterious and invisible universe of atoms and molecules.
Great. So again, just before I introduce the panelists, I wanted to just share a few really basic facts with everybody. Some of these, it's taken me the 15 years of the work I've done so far to learn them, but one of the most basic ones is that 99% of plastics are made from fossil fuels. 99% of plastics are made from fossil fuels, fracked and cracked gas, petroleum, okay, and other chemicals. Plastic was never designed to be recycled. Plastic is still not designed to be recycled. It's a deeper conversation, but the chasing arrows and the numbers identify the polymer type, and 7 is other. So in a sense, we've been duped. And what I'd like to say is that plastic pollutes us, and it pollutes all living things, from our air and water to the soil and our foods. And we primarily package our food and beverages and beauty products and healthcare products and cleaning products in plastic. So it's a real, it's a huge challenge. That's what I would say. And now I'd like to get to the fun part. So here we go. It is my great pleasure to introduce the writer and director of Plastic People, Ben Addelman. Just a little bit of background. Ben is the director and producer of 5 award-winning feature documentaries and numerous television series. His films have screened at major festivals including Sundance, Hot Dogs, Edinburgh, Human Rights Watch, NYC, and Whistler. His work on television has been broadcast on Apple TV+, Disney+, Netflix, BBC, Viceland, CBC, Sundance Channel, National Geographic, and others. So welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Next, I'd like to welcome President of the Canadian Climate Institute and the executive producer of Plastic People, Rick Smith.
Hi.
Rick has worked to protect people from the damaging impacts of pollution for over 20 years. He is the president of the Canadian Climate Institute, the Canadian government's climate change policy advisor. He has written 2 books on the topic of toxic chemicals in the human body, including the international bestseller, Slow Death by Rubber Duck, which the Washington Post said is hard-hitting in a way that turns your stomach and yet also instills hope. Thanks for joining us, Rick.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And last but not least, and I hate that I'm saying that because it's such an honor to introduce her. Next to me, please welcome Waterkeeper and 2023 Goldman Prize winner, Diane Wilson. Diane Wilson is a 4th-generation shrimper, boat captain, mother of 5, author of 3 books, and an environmental peace and social justice advocate. During the last 34 years, she has launched legislative campaigns, demonstrations, hunger strikes. She's sunk boats, and she's even climbed chemical towers in her fight to protect her Gulf Coast Bay. She is a co-founder of the Texas Jail Project, which advocates for inmates' rights in Texas county jails, co-founder of Texas Injured Workers, which advocates for injured workers in the petrochemical, oil, and gas industry on the Gulf Coast. She's the former executive director of Union of Commercial Oystermen of Texas, an organization comprised of over 375 Latino commercial fishermen from Galveston to Port Aransas, Texas. We're honored to have you with us today, Diane.
Thank you.
To begin our conversation, I'd like to ask each of you, and I think I'm going to start with Rick, what brought you to become part of this film?
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here, and such an honor to be here with Diane. Back in 2018, I started noticing the first of a brand new wave of science finding microplastics in the human body. There was one study out of Europe that came out in 2018 that found microplastics in human poo with a very small sample of people. And I thought, I mean, number one, I was shocked. And then secondly, I thought, you know, I could probably recreate that study. So I actually found a research group at Rochester Institute of Technology that I worked with, tested myself, actually did a few things to try to crank up my levels of microplastic pollution, reduce them again, tested myself over a couple of weeks. And that became a feature story in our national newspaper in Canada, the Globe and Mail. And that led to my meeting Peter Raymont from White Pine Pictures, the producer of our documentary. So that's got the ball rolling in terms of this idea of a film that really zeroes in on the human health urgency of plastic pollution.
Which I think is really key. It's key. Ben?
Well, I was lucky. I was not involved in this issue, sort of like passing knowledge of the plastic pollution issue, but I was approached by two very great producers, one Vanessa Dillantier and Peter Raymont, probably two of the better producers you could be approached by in Toronto, Canada, where we're from, and asked about this project, and then introduced to Rick. And those early conversations were very inspiring. A lot of my first conversation with Rick, a lot of that content ended up in the film. So that doesn't happen every day in my role, where you get asked to work on like a major kind of project like this. We made a little teaser with the other director, Zaya Tong. I met her, did an interview with her early on, also in the film, the first little thing we made. So I'm sort of here to represent the filmmaking side of things. These are the sort of experts on, plastic and like all the, human health implications. And we did expand the scope of it a little bit. Vanessa and Peter and Rick are always, it's very much about human health. But we did expand the scope a bit to be about like, to include people like Diane, who she'll tell you all about her situation. I'm sure maybe a lot of you know about her. And also about sort of like how humanity became intertwined with plastic. So yeah, so it becomes a bit of an essay film, a bit of an adventure film. I hope you guys watch it someday.
Diane.
Well, I've been fighting plastic for like 35 years, and I finally did a lawsuit against one of the biggest plastic polluters on the Texas Gulf Coast, and it kind of gave some publicity on Formosa Plastics and how bad they were, and I actually had these guys get a hold of me, and it's probably for the lawsuit that was out there and how big it was, and that we got zero discharge of plastic. So I was really glad to hear from them, because I've been working with plastic and with workers and community and fishermen for a very long time, but the whole thing on the health impacts were sadly missing. And so I love it that it's going to start covering that, and you're going to see the problems and the real health impacts from this plastic.
So just continuing your answer that you just shared, I mean, how long have you been seeing the health impact of the petrochemical industry and the plastic industry?
I have been seeing the health impacts of plastic since 1989, and that's when I first got to know Formosa Plastics. It was the biggest plastic expansion in Texas history. I think it was the largest in the United States in 10 years. And so I was a fisherwoman, and I got to know the workers, and I got to know the community right across the road from Formosa, and the plastic was everywhere. It was on the workers, it was on the cars, it was in the streets, it was in the pools, it was everywhere. It dominated everything, and everybody was like, the plant managers, they would even bring little bottles of plastic, white PVC, vinyl chloride, to my meetings, and they're like, it's harmless, pass it around, touch it, it's harmless, it's harmless. And it's like, and right off, I started seeing the health impacts, but there was no studies, there was no interest there. Everybody just poo-pooed it, said, it's just us. So anyway.
I'm going to come back to you about that. Okay. I don't know if you've all been following the news, but 2024 started out with a bang. There was a study the first week that came out talking about millions of microplastics in bottled water, but also in drinking water. So that kind of kicked off the year this year. And then we've just had a study that's been released in the last week or so, making a connection between microplastics and plaque in our bodies and an increase in health issues and heart issues, heart attacks, et cetera. So let's talk a little bit about the science around microplastics, because it feels like it's brand new. I think it's been going on for a little while, but the public is just really starting to wake up to it.
Yeah.
So, Rick.
Yeah, I think there's this idea, that I certainly had up until the last couple of years, that plastic's kind of a problem out there. Like it's out in the world, it's out in the environment, it's litter, it's like the plastic water bottles you see on the streets, but it's outside of us, right? It's an environmental problem. And as you point out, Dianna, I mean, what these new studies are now showing is that the ultimate dumping place for plastics is our own bodies. And we tell the story in the movie of how your average plastic water bottle basically winds up pulverized into tiny microscopic plastic shards that then become so light they have become a permanent fixture of ecosystem processes around the world. So that they're now in the water cycle. They're sucked up into clouds. They come down in the rain. They become a part of the plants that we eat and the animals that we eat that eat those plants. And this new wave of science that you've mentioned, that just in the last couple of years, is showing microplastics suffusing our bodies. And we tell the story in the movie. Our colleague Zaya Tong, great science journalist from Canada, kind of travels the world getting her body tested for microplastics. And I can tell you that we can get more into this, but the researchers we talked to globally in Turkey, across the US, in Europe, in the Philippines, are really concerned at the human health implications of this and the links to disease and the extent to which microplastic levels in our bodies are probably rising. And so the problem is getting worse, not better.
Again, let's come back to that. Diane, in your community, how were you seeing the health issues play out?
Well,
what did they look like?
Well, mainly from the workers, they were, especially in the vinyl chloride, because Formosa made PVC like vinyl chloride, and then they made polyethylene, polypropylene, and then they made pellets. People mainly hear about the nurdles, and the workers didn't call them nurdles, they called them pellets. And so anyway, most people, when they talk about the plastic from the chemical companies, they're talking about the nurdles. But what was really extraordinary was these guys that were in the vinyl units and around the PVC and the vinyl chloride, and they were getting knots on their heads. And like some of them, this one worker, he was a shift supervisor, and he had worked for the company for 25 years, and he said, like, every day there were so many vinyl chloride leaks, and this is PVC powder. This is the plastic. It was, there were so many that they started just turning off the alarms, and it was like every day for 25 years, every hour of every day. And they were getting a lot of liver cancer, and they were getting knots on their head. And there was such a concern about the knots in brain cancer that even the upper management at Formosa got wind of it. And so they sent this memo to all the workers, and they said, not to worry, we're going to bring in this health study, this report, and we're going to bring in a doctor. And pretty much they brought in a study that was financed by the Vinyl Institute, and they brought in a doctor, and it was like, there's no problem with the vinyl chloride and PVC and the plastic affecting you at all. And matter of fact, the real concern is probably the barbecue you eat. It's the nitrates. It's the nitrates, yes.
So I'll just bring us back to, I don't know how many of you are familiar, a year ago there was that big train derailment in Pennsylvania, Ohio, then that train was carrying vinyl chloride in order to make PVC pipes. We are also in the midst of swapping out and getting rid of all the lead pipes across the United States. And unfortunately, a lot of those are being replaced with plastic PVC pipes. This is toxic for humans. We already saw that a year later, that whole community has been poisoned by that train derailment. Anyway, I'll just bring us back to, again, like on a broader level, what other kinds of illnesses have you talked about with experts, have you seen in your own community? Because I feel like you're deep in it, Diane. And so, you know, some of those things is just like, oh, everybody suffers from that, and it becomes normalized, but it's not normal.
Oh,
so.
yeah. Well, I know one real interesting, because I've worked with, I've worked in this issue for 35 years. So probably at least 3 workers a year have been whistleblowers, or they were exposed, and they would come to me. So I've probably talked to 100 workers over the years. And I know that, so you get to know these workers really well, and you get to know some of their characteristics, and they're always sending you emails, and they're writing things for you. And I remember there was a research scientist at Galveston Hospital before Hurricane Ike came around, and we were trying to get the workers tested on the sly, because the company does not want the workers tested to get real-time vinyl chloride from plastic being checked in the workers. And I know this researcher, he was like, because we were communicating with these workers, and every one of those workers, when they wrote me an email, I couldn't tell the difference from one worker to the, because there was not a single capitalized letters, there was no spaces, it was just this long, it was crazy. And the thing of it is, and he was really curious how the workers were all seemed to be like that. And I know just recently there's this new study out on the microplastics causing dementia. And I guarantee you, I have had my share of exposed and injured workers that have been out there 20, 25 years working in this very fine microplastic dust. And there's some strange symptoms, a lot of neurological symptoms from the workers.
And Diane, in the film, remember what Dale says. There's a character in the film that Diane helps me interview because they know each other, and he says that he lost the memory of his children growing up, and the doctor told him that he thinks that's from getting a high dose of benzene, which is a chemical that was present in the factories. So we interview one of the people that basically Diane's talking about. Is that correct? That's basically what we're talking about. Yeah. Who goes through this sort of litany of health problems. Like, you know, it almost is hard to hear. It's so sort of extensive. Loses the use of his legs, memory loss, boils. I mean, I'm sure I'm forgetting a few things right now, but pain, all kinds of pain. And he was tested. Maybe this is what you're talking about. He was tested.
Yes, he was tested.
And and all the chemicals he worked with were just, you know, all in his body. So the doctor sort of asked him, have you heard of this chemical, this chemical, this chemical? He said, yes, those are the ones that I work with.
So what we try to do in the film is sort of connect these very acute problems that Diane's community are having and communities we visit around the world, and then take a look at how we're all being affected by microplastics that are now prevalent throughout the world. So what we have in the movie are the first time on film that microplastics are found in human blood, found in human placentas. Diane has talked a little bit about vinyl, and Dianna, you just mentioned this very important study that came out in the New England Journal of Medicine last week, finding vinyl in the arteries of heart patients, and some very strong evidence that that's one of the things driving rates of heart attack and stroke and death. So literally I mean, I've been sort of using as a rhetorical phrase for years that microplastics are clogging our arteries. But it actually turns out that microplastics in this study are clogging people's arteries. So I mean, I think important that we get to it because I have no doubt that many people are thinking, this movie sounds depressing as hell.
It is.
Knowledge is power.
Yeah, and like, my God, I could have gone to see Roadhouse.
Also depressing.
Which my son and I saw the other night, and it was fantastic. But we are going to get to this. I mean, we try in the movie to do two things: to underline the scope of this absolutely batshit crazy problem we've created for ourselves, and point to the fact that solutions are obvious and totally possible.
I'm going to get to solutions in
All
a
right,
second.
yeah, I was just watching people's faces
Yeah.
as we were reiterating the pain.
No, I mean, I think
the boils.
After the
and,
first edit, everyone said it's too depressing. It's too depressing. All the producers, everybody, and some of the funders too are here as well. Yeah.
I think it's just it's important to understand that we are living in 2024 and that our consumption of plastic is totally out of control and production has skyrocketed. And during the pandemic, it skyrocketed even more with PPE stuff, et cetera, and everyone thinking they needed to quadruple wrap everything, you know, because that was going to be safer for us all. But that said, before we move on to solutions, I'd like to also talk about how plastic and plastic pollution are connected to climate change. So.
Oh, that's your topic, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, I mean, plastic is kind of a double whammy when it comes to pollution. As you mentioned off the top, Dianna, I mean, most plastic, virtually all plastic, is a petrochemical derivative. And there's this interesting, I mean, my day job is working on climate change. I work for the Canadian Climate Institute, so I think a lot about the differences and the similarities between the plastic pollution issue and the climate issue. And there's a strange relationship between the increasing progress we're making on climate change. I mean, even the most difficult oil company these days recognizes that we're probably not going to be burning their product in our cars 30 years from now. A lot of big plastics companies are branch plants of oil companies, and so increasingly oil companies are going all in on increasing plastic production and plasticizing our lives, and the numbers are off the charts. Like half the plastic produced in human history has been produced in the last 15 years. So we're in the most exponential of curves when it comes to plastic production. And of course, we know this intuitively. Every time you go to the grocery store, there's some other product that we, you know, for me, I love pickles, and I have a particular brand of pickles that I look for in the grocery store. And you know, the other day I went.
Give it a plug.
And the other day I went, and lo and behold, my favorite pickle brand is in a plastic jar now. It used to be glass. So like, you know, and I just as a thought experiment for this panel, I thought, well, maybe if we're talking about plastic, I should try to find a new pair of jeans, because I need a new pair of jeans. Maybe I should find a new pair of jeans with no plastic in it. So then I could say on stage, well, I'm sitting here and, you know, you can actually find alternatives these days still that don't have plastic. And I was unable to find a brand of jeans that doesn't have some degree of plastic content. So as we're making progress on the climate impact, and oil companies are sort of getting their head around that, they're cranking up plastic production as a result.
Well, I think they're diversifying into everything else, because when you see everyone saying we need to divest from fossil fuels, you know, we're seeing that plastic is a plan B for the petrochemical industry. It's also a little scary. I don't know if any of you have ever had this experience where you walk into like a Costco or a Walmart or a big store and think to yourself, I wonder if anything in here is not made out of plastic, because I've had that experience now a number of times, and it's really daunting, you know, or when you need to buy clothing. to buy things that are not synthetic, which is plastic.
And a lot of plastic is made here in Texas too, which is another reason why we filmed in Texas a couple times at currently the biggest plastics factory in the world, which is in Portland, Texas. I don't think it's too far of a drive. I think maybe it's a 3-hour drive. Is that right? It's not too far.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's a steam cracker plant that uses natural gas, and it's extremely cheap and extremely profitable, and it's oil and gas companies that run it. It's brand new. It's like 2 years old or something, maybe not even.
The footage you get from there is incredible.
Yeah. And we talked to sort of a neighbor, a gentleman who wanted to stay anonymous, but he didn't mind having his face on camera. He just didn't want his name. So don't let me accidentally mention his name, or just forget it if I do. Mm-hmm. But he lives half a mile away, and it's a short half a mile. Like it's because there's almost nothing there. You can see the plant is basically in his backyard, a massive, multi-billion-dollar plant, run by Exxon and SABIC, who are two huge, oil and gas companies. And it's just because there's so much natural gas now, so much fracking. It's so cheap. It's so plentiful. So it's not far. It's
but
not
the question, Ben, is do we need more fracked and cracked gas to make single-use plastic water bottles?
Yes, and this person in the film, he's a pretty, he's an interesting guy, but he's a relatively mainstream guy. He's not, an activist or anything, and he is just appalled by having this near his house and what they make. It's polyvinyl. Oh no, that's polyethylene. What they make at that plant, which is basically packaging. Some other things, but mostly packaging. So it's just like, and it uses tons of water, more water than the whole county. Yeah, that's so that things can be packaged, single-use products can be made.
But I don't know if this fact is correct anymore, but it used to be, maybe before they started making thinner plastic water bottles, that you need 3 bottles worth of water.
That's true.
And a third of a bottle of oil to produce 1 single-use plastic bottle.
Yeah, you use more water to create the bottle you use more water to create the bottle that volume of water will be.
I'm
having a hard time expressing
it's okay,
it. But
I know what you
yes,
mean. Yeah.
And terribly wasteful is my summary.
And that got cut from the film. That there's now water restrictions in that county. The name of the county escapes me, but it's like Portland, Texas. It's I'm sure it'd be easy to find. Maybe Calhoun County. Is that possible?
Yeah, it's down in Corpus Christi.
Yeah, it's across the bridge from Corpus Christi. Yeah. It's just directly across the bridge. Right. And so now they have water restrictions, and they never used to before. So yeah.
But also just here in Houston, isn't it like about 80 miles worth of petrochemical plants?
Oh my God, yeah, Houston Ship Channel. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about 80 miles long.
Not in Austin though. Houston.
Yeah, Houston. Yeah. That was the first time I got to go on a toxic tour. You were there in 2015. It was really eye-opening for me, you guys. Anyway, all right, let's get to solutions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who'd like to start?
This guy here in the front row is like saying, thank God.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the solutions that we've been working on for a while is policy and legislative-based solutions.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you guys would talk to any of that. What have you been able to bring about any policy?
Well, what we managed to get when we did the clean water suit, a citizen clean water suit, because the state, TCEQ, nor the EPA enforced any of the violations that Formos had been doing. So we did a citizen clean water suit because the state and the EPA had no violations. We collected our own for 2.5 years. And so when we won the lawsuit and we did a settlement with Formosa, we got 0 discharge of plastic. That means their permit, they cannot discharge plastic. And if they do, we started out the first year, it was $15,000 a day. Then it was $20,000, then it's $25,000, then it went up to $30,000, and now we charge them the maximum $65,000 a day for their plastic discharges. And at this rate that Formosa's going, they are penalized $1 million a month. They have been fined almost $16 million because plastic, and it goes onto your beaches, those kids going down to Padre Island, there's plastic all over that. It's in the waves, it's the plastic on the beaches, and these chemical plants, you know, Formosa's a big polluter, and they're notorious, and they're probably a rogue plant, but Texas has got a bunch of them, and I promise you, they are all putting out the pellets in these tiny microplastics in it's in the waves, and God only knows where the PVC that's supposed to be heavier goes. The workers in the plant told me, he said, that's what really concerned him, because the polyethylene, the polypropylene, the powder, and the pellets will float. But all of this PVC, it goes down.
Sinks.
And it's like, who knows what it's doing.
Well, sorry,
nobody knows.
I know I'm trying to bring us to policy and
Yeah.
legislation and solutions, but sorry, one other question just about this. How has this impacted your shrimping and the industry there, the local fisher folk?
Well, how it's impacted so far is like our fisheries are in a crisis. There is none where in my community, it's an entirely fishing community. That's their whole history. And it's like we had 125 boats, we had 5 shrimp houses, and the entire town, it was the community, and it is gone. I mean, the fish houses are bulldozed. Where there were 120 boats, there are now maybe 5. And the season is over with in 2 weeks, where it used to be several months. The whole thing is in a crisis, and now their shrimpers are trying now to rig out and be oystermen, and the Vietnamese shrimpers are going broke. The Vietnamese crabbers are going broke. The Hispanic oystermen, it's all going broke, and it's just you never expect to see your hometown just disappear like that. And it's that fast. Yeah, very tragic.
All right, we're coming back to
Sorry about
solutions. We're coming back to solutions. Can you all talk about, I know, Rick, you're aware of this, but can you talk about what's coming up now? I know we've been negotiating it for a couple years, or drafting the language, the UN Plastic Treaty, and what that is.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, let me just say, full stop. This is a solvable problem. This is not. Yeah. I mean, this is actually a fairly recent problem that we've created for ourselves. Like, many of us are old enough to remember going into the grocery store. Not everything was made out of plastic, and 40%. Let's just start here. 40% of all the plastic produced today, including in plants near Diane, is for single-use items. So plastic coffee lids, plastic straws, plastic cutlery. That is nearly half of our plastic problem right there. Is like takeout containers and packaging and things like that. So we need to reduce plastic production. We need to make sure that the plastic that we continue to use, because there's lots of things about plastic very useful. We can't go without plastic in our daily lives, but we can make it in a less toxic way, and we can actually reuse it and make sure that existing recycling systems are actually working as opposed to being broken, as you mentioned off the top. So we need to attack this at different levels. Municipalities across the US, across the world, are actually attacking the single-use plastic problem. Provinces, states are moving forward with different initiatives. And I think the biggest opportunity we have at the moment, like a once-in-a-generation opportunity, is all of the countries around the world now have come together through the United Nations to negotiate this new global plastics treaty. And we're 6 months away from that being concluded, hopefully successfully. So we have some calls to action in the film. we suggest ways that people can get involved, can talk to their local representatives to make sure that this plastics treaty keeps moving forward.
Yeah.
But solutions are within our grasp here, and we don't need to live in a world where, like, every few feet there's a plastic water bottle kicking around. These are solvable issues.
Yeah, I would say part of that call to action is people are welcome to, there is a petition you can sign to support a strong UN plastic treaty. And you can find it, it's one of the calls to action from the film. I think policy and legislation are really valuable tools in this, not just at the international level, but also at the federal level. We've got the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, and also the Right to Repair Act. If we could repair things, or if things are designed so that every single gadget that we get doesn't have a different plug, you know, and that things can be repaired or reused. Currently, things are not designed that way. When I say things, you could just apply that to everything around us. But I think those are exciting pieces of policy at the federal level in the US. And then there's state level policy and cities. And a lot of cool stuff is happening and being implemented and has been signed into law. I mean, I feel I live in California. I know it's like a different animal, you know, than the rest of the United States. But Governor Newsom has signed into law various laws that will massively reduce the use of single-use takeaway plastics. And so I'm looking forward to, of course, the devil's in the details, the implementation of that. But I think there's also what we can do on a personal level as we begin to learn about this. And I noticed that a lot of people at South by Southwest this week have reusable steel bottles or glass bottles, or I call this, you know, like my comfort cup. It's a steel insulated cup. I really like traveling with this and using it all the time. We can choose materials that are healthier and safer for us, from glass and food-grade steel to ceramic to wood to a lot of things that we used when I was growing up and I was a kid. I grew up with a milkman that delivered milk in glass bottles to an apartment building in Hollywood, California, you know, and that with little tiny paper foil tops on them. I guess, you know, we don't live in that world exactly anymore, but I'm seeing people bring back these reuse, refill models, and I think that's very, very promising. I'm wondering if folks are doing things like that in your community, Diane, how you're approaching. Is there any reuse or refill happening, or do you have to be careful because of what's around you?
I have to be careful about what I say. And so it's, yeah, most of them would say, oh, that's being woke, or that's being a snowflake, or so, you know.
Texas.
Yeah, Texas.
There was in the Austin papers a couple of days ago. There was a big piece about single-use plastic, you know, fighting that on a municipal level. So it's happening here in Austin.
Well, I mean, we're watching it happen around the world too. I think it's also really important to say to everybody, this film takes you to different parts of the world. So we're not just looking at what's happening here in Texas, or, for example, what's happening a few miles from where I live in Los Angeles and Wilmington and Long Beach. And, you know, we have a whole oil corridor that's on the way to Los Angeles International Airport. It's miles and miles of working oil fields that we've all just pretty much ignored my whole life. But a lot of stuff is hidden in plain sight in cities. It's interesting.
Right.
You know, on the backside of a shopping mall, the corner of the high school I went to had an oil well that was disguised in something else. There was a class action lawsuit from the students who were doing sports there because a lot of them developed different forms of cancer and leukemia. So, okay, let's come back to solutions. Ben.
No, I mean, for me, it's the term single use that I would just like always use. Because once you know the stuff that we've sort of, for me it was relatively new, learned making this film, it is just outrageous that so much plastic is used for single use. Just like, you know, and I think a lot of people will feel that way once they know the extent to it. So to me, keep saying the word single use. It like gets into people's heads. So every time you're using something, like this little thing is going to basically last forever. 30 seconds of, you know, your coffee cup or whatever else it is, water bottle. And it'll get inside you and you'll stop using it as much. I mean, and no one has to be perfect also. We don't want to shift the blame to like individual people trying to live in the world. But yeah, single use for this kind of material is just impossible to sustain. And I trust that people will get the message and be kind of revolted enough by it. That's why this sort of, you know, kind of fun debate amongst ourselves about whether or not, like, you know, it's too depressing to show the scale of the problem. I think that is the solution. People knowing the scale of the problem, personally.
I agree with you. I think it's also important for people to know that these chemicals and our exposure to microplastics affects our fertility and our sexual function, and has been linked to prostate cancer and breast cancer and brain cancer and obesity and diabetes. These function like endocrine disruptors, and they make our bodies hold more fat. So a lot of things that we're seeing epidemics of could have a relationship or have been linked to plastics and the chemicals in plastic.
Yeah.
So definitely, so first step, make less and use less, right? Like, and and you know, Rick got that into my head, you know, a long time ago. It's actually quite simple. You know, it's not a big technological solution. It's not, it's right there to be sort of taken and grabbed.
Yeah, and with that, I would like to open the floor to questions. And so if you'd like to ask a question, please, we can form a line by the microphone. And we'll look forward to your questions. Hello.
Hi, thanks. A quick question. You talked about alternatives. Almost all the food is sold in plastic containers. What is the alternative to the plastic containers? I'm not talking about the bottles of water. You can get water from a tap. If you buy cheese in its plastic packaging, even things that look like paper are actually containing plastic. Almost everything we buy from the grocery store is. So what's the alternative for that one?
I mean, the first thing I'd say is that a lot of us are old enough to remember when that wasn't the case, right? It used to be that food packaging was, you know, there was plastic, but there was also glass, and there was metal, and there was paper. And we've started to see some real differences now in terms of some big retailers moving towards safer packaging, and some big retailers not. So as consumers, I think we have a greater opportunity now to support retailers that are sincerely trying. And there's big moves within the packaging industry to try to find safer formulations. I mean, one of the organizations we've talked to for the film, the Safe Packaging Consortium. I mean, there are actually some big brands around the world who are very alive to this. Consumer-facing brands, right? I mean, if you're a big grocery store and you deal with consumers every day, and increasingly those consumers are worried about plastic, and I think once as Ben says, once more people realize that plastic is a human health problem, not just an environmental problem, that pressure will only increase. So we're starting to see some real changes with brands that are consumer-facing, telling plastic companies to take a hike. They're concerned, and they're going to try to do things differently. So whatever we can do as consumers to up that pressure, that'll help.
And here's a thought experiment. If a huge brand just said, okay, no more plastic, we're going back to glass. Coca-Cola did that. Do you think people would be willing to spend a little bit more? Do you think it'd be worth it for them for like the publicity they got for that? That's definitely crossed my mind. Why hasn't someone grabbed that? Do people care enough for that?
Is there enough sand in the world for the glass?
I don't know. I don't know. I think glass is a pretty easily recyclable material. I'm not an expert on that.
Hang on, let's actually take us back before we're recycling something, because recycling is somewhat broken, particularly when it comes to plastic. I don't even understand why we smash glass, why we don't just take it to a local place, sterilize it and refill it, which is what we did before. And most MRF systems still have facilities to wash and sterilize bottles. So I think we have to also take this to the idea of implementing refill and reuse systems, infrastructure that supports that, And then we're also, Plastic Pollution Coalition, we're looking at not only our organizations, but our business member groups. And there are people doing amazing replacements for things that are plastic-like out of seaweed, algae, mushroom mycelium. There's amazing stuff happening right now, and they've had huge investment, and we need to support those industries, but also just in our own communities, at our schools, at our place of business, we need to look for ways to reinforce and support reuse and refill. And that right there will cut down on a lot of what we're talking about, a lot of the plastic that's been created. There's also a great tool called the Understanding Packaging Scorecard. It's at upscorecard.org if anybody is interested and has a business and wants to do a comparison of materials.
Hi, my name is David. I come from Vancouver, Canada, where single-use plastic is it's completely banned. So if you go to Starbucks, you get paper straws and paper-based cups and stuff like that.
And society as we know it has ground to a halt. No, it hasn't.
Even though there are many cities and municipalities that are, trying to, move towards that trend, I still think there is a big confusion in the society because you also hear from the internet, hey, it's buying recyclable grocery bags, for example, is equivalent to tens of thousands of uses of single plastic bag. And it has more, deeper carbon footprint.
A reusable bag versus a...
Yes. So I'm not really sure if how one can be, correctly informed.
Yeah.
Like what are some of the resources where we can turn to if we have any questions, like if we want to recycle like contaminated plastic. Can we recycle or can we throw them away? There are a lot of questions.
Sorry, can I answer some of this?
Yeah,
we, in the world, have recycled less than 9% of all the plastic, and I don't even think we're actually recycling it. We downcycle it. So I wouldn't recommend, I personally wouldn't recommend using recycled plastic for any kind of food or beverage product. If people are going to invest in reusables or lunch boxes or containers for themselves, for their children, for people that they care about or love, I would highly recommend that they are not plastic. I would recommend that they are food-grade steel or glass. And that's because you want to use something that you put your food in that's non-reactive and biobenign, so it's not impacting your health. Switching just to paper or paper cups for hot liquid, etc., what we've seen is that most of those paper cups also have a certain percentage of plastic in them. That's so that they won't leak, or the food containers. And why use a paper straw? I say when I carry stainless steel straws, but I'm pretty hardcore, I know. I used to carry glass ones, but I broke a couple of them, but anyway. I really think that we need to think about some of this has to do with overconsumption and consumption, and this idea that we need to buy more and more, rather than just using something that's sturdy, that's well-made, that we have, and using it hundreds or thousands of times. And then the argument for the reusable bag, and that it uses more energy to make, or that it might contain E. coli, those are coming from industry, that messaging. And it's false. It's false. It may take more energy to make a reusable canvas bag or cloth bag or a basket, but the potential to use it thousands of times versus a plastic bag, there's no comparison.
I think.
Thank you.
Last, just to add to that, the implications of this new science that we feature in the movie and this notion of all of us being polluted with microplastics, our kids being polluted with microplastics, and the chemicals in those plastics then being fed into our bodies on a minute-by-minute basis from these tiny particulate pollutants. I mean, that is a once people get their head around that drives certain conclusions. The first conclusion it drives is we need to make and use less plastic because we've designed these systems that are receiving that pollution into our bodies directly. And so I would be, I hear these same arguments that you've outlined, And I think the notion of plastic as an urgent human health threat just means that we need to make and use less plastic, period. And it doesn't matter what yarns industry is spinning to try to impede that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for this great panel. Can't wait to see the movie. When you talk about the single-use plastics, during your making this, did you collaborate with any medical companies? Because I'm a retired physician, and I mean, much of medicine has improved. My father had hepatitis when he got out of the Navy, and they used glass syringes to check his blood. Medical use, how can we get rid of the IVs? It's all single use.
There's great organizations that are taking this on. Healthcare Without Harm is one of them, trying to address not just the overall use of plastic in medicine, but also what type of plastic is being used. And this is, Dianna mentioned this a few minutes ago. Many of the common plastics we still use arose after the Second World War, were proprietary formulations from different chemical companies, and the chemical cocktails that go into those plastics haven't been properly safety tested. And so there's a big detoxification exercise to do in terms of those areas of our lives where we're going to continue using plastics. I think medicine is one of those areas. But having phthalates leaking from the IV bags into those solutions is obviously not tolerable. Phthalates being linked to breast cancer, prostate cancer. So we've talked to some of those organizations through the making of the film, and they're making some progress in the medical world.
It's a challenge.
Thank you. I imagine that decades of unglamorous work went into you being on this stage. I work in textile, which is, I'm very glad the conversation is starting to talk about fiber, polyester, obviously plastic, but something that I hear missing in a lot of the conversation is that dye is also plastic. And this is something that I think most consumers don't know. Textile is one of the most polluting, unregulated industries in the world.
Oh, yeah.
Thousands of chemicals, all derived from petrochemical. And I find that most people I talk to do not know this. My company is trying to work on this. We've made synthetic-free textiles. Nobody understood what we were doing, so we took our textile wastewater and turned it into skincare. To say, you can put this on your face, it's still good for you, even our waste is. But still, people are not understanding because consumers aren't empowered around the conversation in textile is only about polyester, which, thank you, but also, how do we also talk about dye? How do we also talk about treatments? How do we get the textile industry regulated?
There's a lot of great stuff happening with the textile and fashion industry, and we've participated in panels and had them on panels we've done. On our website, on the Plastic Pollution Coalition website, we have a whole webinar section of the last 2 years, and there are at least 2, if not 3 panels that are all focused on fashion and some of what you speak. So the conversation is happening. It's just, part of it is people, all the people who are working on different aspects of this issue finding each other.
Yeah.
And finding a common voice and building that into something that then works to push for policy.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say something. About a year ago, I had a fiber conference, and they were doing a innovative and creative big conference, and they wanted me to speak, and I was like, I was trying to figure out how I kind of fit into it until they told me that, like, Formosa Fiber is like their customers to do this, to make the clothes. It was about 40 to 50% were buying from Formosa Fiber. So it was a huge amount that they were using of plastic, and they were trying to change that, and they were given prizes for people who could think of very creative ways to get away from it. But you're right, I did not know that. That's a big one. It's a big one.
I think it's by design.
Yeah, by design, yeah.
Thank you so much.
No, you bet.
We have time for one more question. Yeah. Thank you.
My question, I live in LA, and I don't know if you saw recently, but the LA Times came out and showed that California's plastic bag ban totally backfired in that it created more plastic bag waste because they were supposedly reusable bags that you're getting at the store. So how do you think we can design smarter regulation to prevent that type of single-use evasion?
So we're working on that. I also live in Los Angeles, and there was a loophole in that legislation that allowed them to allowed the plastic industry and the petrochemical industry to make thicker bags and print a picture of the earth or a happy face on it and say this bag is reusable. Or to make the thicker kind of woven ones, which they're then selling to everybody. That was a loophole. What we've now found, and one of our coalition members, the last beach cleanup, just actually sued, is that none of the plastic bag drop-offs for supposedly being able to recycle plastic bags actually were recycling them because they're not recyclable. So how can we move past that? I think we are putting together better legislation. Again, there's this globalplasticlaws.org. It's a database. It's a website you can go to look up best laws. What started out in 2009 as how to start a bag ban in your town or how to start a polystyrene ban in your town is now its own entire website and database with better and best policy to help people. So
I think there's also a very powerful element of this new testing that's available and that we feature in the film, which is that you can actually tell what kinds of plastics are in people's bodies and what shape they are. And so the previous woman who asked about polyester fiber, we actually found polyester fiber in Zayatong's body, and then you're able to say, well, that came from clothing. Or if you find a fragment of polypropylene or polystyrene,
right, you can identify it.
That comes, then you're able to say, well, that came from packaging or a plastic bag. Mm-hmm. So that's what's coming in terms of this new, more sensitive scientific testing. And I think that's going to make it very tough for plastic companies to get away with this anymore, because you'll be able, there's a story to tell about where that fiber came from in your body or your kids' bodies.
Smart.
And you can't get away from that.
I was going to say we are at time, and I know Ben and I wanted to, well, first of all, I want to thank you all so much for joining us and thank my esteemed panelists. We wanted to let you know that if you've not seen the film yet, it will be screened 3 more times during the festival. There are 2 screenings tomorrow, March 12th at 8:45 and 9:15 p.m. And that's at the Alamo Lamar.
Yeah.
And then there's a final screening on Thursday, March 14th. It'll be at 11:45 a.m. And yeah, all the screenings are going to take place at the Draft House, Alamo Lamar. And I've seen the film now 3 times, so it's very much worthwhile to see and beautifully made.
And also, we have a few guest tickets, so your passes can get you in. But if you have someone you might want to bring, come talk to Stephen and I. We'll give you enough of them, Diane. But
okay, thank you.
Yeah, and please vote for the Audience Award if you see it. It'll help with us in our sort of campaign as we go forward.
The URL on the screen.
It's on the screen.
Oh,
yeah.
It's already there.
Oh, that's the solution.
Okay.
There's voting, but the other, sorry, Stephen, go ahead. I was going to say there's 2. If you want to take action, scan the QR code, it'll lead to our website. And there's a list of things you can do. This QR code leads to the South by Southwest app, so you can vote for your film. I'll go back to the previous one for a second. That was too fast.
Got it?
All right, thanks so much.
Thanks very much for coming, guys.
guys.
Thanks for sticking around. Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good.
Yay.
Thanks, that was great. Good job.
Sorry I did it.
Good job.
Sorry. I'm just...